Thank you, Karolina. I'm happy we didn't have time before to teach you any more Finnish that you could use against me. Because that's my native country, as you can probably guess from the name, it's not Norwegian. But if you do want to catch me here later on, I can try to accommodate by speaking Finnish, Swedish, and that's up to you to understand after that. But really happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be. I assume that this clock is just here to throw me off and it's not really showing the 45 minutes that I have. Good. Excellent. That just adds to the fun. But yeah, I am sort of well prepared because I actually this morning went and looked at what had I actually signed up to talk about. I went and looked at the program, that what was this talk going to be. And from that I gathered that it's going to be something about design thinking, and it's going to be something about the process behind it, and why maybe design thinking in the end can still be relevant, because it has kind of gotten a bad reputation in some circles, and it's maybe been misused and abused, and as many dear children, it has many names. Yeah, I will walk you through a bit of my background, why I'm sort of passionate about this topic, why I feel strongly about the relevance of the design process and design thinking, if you will, or if you want to call it that, and also kind of trying to contextualize that with then what does that mean in any kind of solution development or product development. That I hope is a topic that is of common interest here. So just to kick this off, this is what one of my colleagues call the slide where you sort of try to make yourself relevant. And I'm a designer. If that's not relevant enough, I've done design for about 20 plus years. Currently I work, and why I'm in Stavanger, by the way, not in Finland, is that I work for this local startup called Equinor, where I'm the head of design. It sounds very fancy. I just assure you it's rather than a managerial position, it's really a janitorial position. So my job there is really to make sure that all the designers who work with us have a good environment, the good tools, and I do then try to make sure that things work and we can perform what I am about to talk about in a good way. But maybe to give a bit of context, so I have worked with product development for all my career, and I have usually worked with things that are quite far removed from the consumer market. So that means that I have usually been one of the first or among the first three designers in rather traditional industrial environments, and in many cases I've then had to introduce this way of working and kind of sell the methodology and the way of working and explain why we are doing things, which is now when I'm in a big company like Equinor and in previous large companies, makes me kind of well conditioned then also to run trainings and help people understand what kind of value they can get out from this methodology and process behind it. So that's maybe enough about me, rather than talking about myself, talking about design thinking and the design process, and that I thought requires a bit of definitions. So the first and maybe most important definition is design. I don't really care that much about the thinking, as you will maybe notice here later in the talk. I care more about the first word there. And design for me is actually not related to technology as such. Even though I know we are at a developer-heavy conference, I would kind of challenge you to think when I talk about design and I think about developing new things and creating something new, I would challenge you to think about outside the frameworks of technology here. So what I talk about when I talk about design is really the intent, but most importantly the act of creating something that doesn't yet exist. Because we can all go out and copy something, and we can argue that design goes into that as well, because we need to create the interfaces and so on. But in essence, what I want to talk about today is creating something new. Some people like to call it innovation, some people like to call it design, some people may like to call it art, and there's maybe an interesting definition and discussion to the previous talk here on this stage about that. I would kind of frame it as such that when I talk about design, I talk about something that we consciously create for others, and more often than not in a commercial setting where we then expect some sort of return on the time and effort we spend. Whereas with art, I would say it's more of an individual interest pursuit where we create something that we feel we want, and then if someone likes it, that's great. But that would be my sort of definitions. But most importantly here, whether you do art or design or development or anything, intent is there, intent is important, but the act is the most important thing to get going, to get started. But of course, with that definition in mind, when we do something, when we create something that doesn't yet exist and we create it for someone else, as in a customer, as in an end user, as in a stakeholder group, to be very corporate jargon here, there is another very important kind of unknown, and that unknown is the human in the loop. So design, and I will come back to the kind of theoretical definitions here later on, but design is something that we do for others, i.e. we do it for our fellow humans. And when we talk about humans, I first want us to all kind of realize that that implies certain things. Being human implies that we are experts at various things, but one thing that I would contend is common for all humans is that we are expert at taking shortcuts and making life easy for ourselves. We are experts at finding workarounds to things that are too complex. We are experts at going where there is the path of least resistance. And one could even go so far as to say that this is kind of an evolutionary trait of human beings. Because if we wouldn't have been curious and wanting to understand how things work, how can we make our lives easier, maybe we wouldn't have evolved to where we are now. And I will not go into the argument if that's a good thing or not, but in essence, we are a curious species and we are a species of convenience. And that is very important to always keep in mind if we are performing the act of design, which is to create something that doesn't yet exist for other humans. If we create it just for ourselves, we are the benchmark, that's great, probably the easiest customer ever. But if we create it for someone else, understanding that this is what we all do is critically important. And of course, I work in Equinor. We are a company that deals with pretty safety critical stuff, and if we don't do our job well, things can go very wrong. So there are good reasons why we define that you should always follow the path like that. And we, don't get me wrong, we have tens or hundreds of colleagues who write very angry emails if you don't. And we have very strict governing documents that tell us what to do. And in most cases, that's for a very good reason. And in most cases, those orders and guidelines are being followed. However, there are also countless cases. I've been with Equinor now for 4 years. Already in that time, I've seen countless cases where actually the technology that we develop enforce and even enhance this behavior in humans. So people, when they are faced with technology that doesn't support their work, that makes their life harder, they will create shortcuts. And with design, with the profession of design that I represent, professional designers, I'm not saying it's our monopoly in any way. Anyone can, with this understanding, have this point of view. But with our insight and our point of view into a technology and solution development process, is then really mitigating and understanding this behavior and how can we come up with solutions that don't make this into a dangerous or bad situation for the user. So in design, and this is now getting into a bit of the theory of what is actually design thinking, because I feel that it's important to get sort of done and dusted, because everyone probably has heard about it, and most people probably have an opinion about it, and you don't need to search the net for long to read stories from both sides that either design thinking is dead or design thinking is awesome, and no one really knows what it is. But if we just start paring it down to what are we as designers actually doing. So keeping the same scenario, we have a consumer who doesn't behave the way we expected. So what do? We, in design processes, with design methodology, we need to understand a couple of things. We need to understand, of course, the holistic context. So why are they doing that? We need to understand the life cycle of the situation. So are they coming from somewhere? Are they going somewhere? Why are they doing that? Maybe their boss told them, maybe they want, maybe they need. But understanding the context, in this case, are they outside, are they indoors, are they using a phone, are they using their laptop, are they rushing to the canteen because they just have 15 minutes for a lunch break? All these questions come in and we look at the big picture. We don't just look at, oh, there they started going across and there they stopped. And that is the second bullet point here, so real world evidence. We can call up anyone in Equinor and ask, did you do this work process according to the rules? And they say, yes, we did, absolutely. The rules are, by the way, great. We follow them all the time. And some of them even think they do, even though they do this. We had one case where we had a very complex authority reporting process. And we talked to the vice president of that team who did that process, and he said that, yes, this is how we do it, and it was very much in line with the process diagram that existed, of course. We have a process diagram for everything. Then when we went and actually looked what the people do, is that they copy-paste via their own email and an Excel sheet and a whiteboard and whatnot, because the 2-3 tools that they needed to use didn't talk to each other automatically. So again, real-world evidence that drives our continuous learning. And then the maybe most interesting one for me as a designer, why are humans doing that, and what are the business needs that push humans to do that? Maybe they would actually like to go around the corner, but they have unrealistic expectations on speed. So that's why they take a shortcut. And that is not anymore a technology problem, that's a process problem. So understanding the holistic picture is something we, in the field of design, always are trying to achieve. Now, design thinking. I've talked about it a lot, so I would probably need to get to the point here soon. Design thinking is not a new idea or terminology. So it started to become popularized in the 1980s, 90s. And one of these original scholars, if you will, or consultants, Mr. Tim Brown, he is among the founders of a quite famous design agency called IDEO. He has written a lot of books on the topic. You can Google and you will probably find a number of people who claim they invented design thinking. But Tim Brown is one of the OGs there, and he has good taste in hats. Let's give him that at least. And I like, well, apart from the hats, I like his take on design thinking, which is very well summarized in this sentence. So the mission is to translate observations into insights. So there we have the real world evidence. We have certain observations of real user behavior, not just hearsay that we kind of picked up or created with a chatbot. And we turn them into insights that we can take action on in the development process. And then he continues, insights that can be turned into solutions that will improve lives. So there are some implications there. The insights that we get from our observations need to be somehow actionable, so they need to be possible to turn them into solutions. And again, solutions in the broad terms. We love to think technology first, but technology alone doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So there is a solution, but that solution needs to improve lives. So it implies also that this is something we do for other people, not just for us. So we are not making art for our own sake here. We are creating something that helps other people. And you may notice a few things in this sentence. It doesn't mention anywhere yellow sticky notes and workshops. It doesn't mention Figma prototypes or even technology. It is really agnostic. So let's start there. It's a process of gaining insight through observations and turning those insights into solutions that will improve lives. If we go further down the rabbit hole, and this might be very familiar territory for many here, but this is one of the originators of feasibility, viability, desirability. So again, Tim Brown, with his definition of what makes up a good solution. So we want to have a sustainable solution. Now sustainable again in the broad term, of course, ecologically sustainable is awesome, but also in a business sense as a life cycle of a product. And to achieve that, you need 3 dimensions to be aligned. So feasibility, can we do it? Is it technically within the realm of our abilities? Viability, so in the end of the day, can we make that into a business model that creates upsides for us? And then, of course, desirability. So is this desirable to use for the end user or the customer in the picture? And this is then, now I'm sort of getting hampered by, because I've been doing this talk a lot and technology is working against me, because in the past you always had this big mixing table somewhere in the room. Now it's hidden behind the screen. And I like to talk about these 3 things. If you imagine a mixing table, you have levers that you can pull up and down. So throughout the process of design and all the methodology that we employ there, we are actually tweaking these levers. We are maximizing the feasibility, but then that means that we need to compensate by pulling up the price through and then is it any more viable? Maybe it's not any more desirable. And looking through this balance and tweaking those levers all the time, in the end, is going to lead us to the sustainable solution with a life cycle. And how do we do that? That's where now we get into methodology. So we talk about diverging and converging methodology. And in design thinking theory and in the design process, that's a really core concept of either you have methodology that creates choices for you, or you have methodologies that help you take decisions. Because any kind of development activity is either about understanding what choices you have and then taking decisions based on them. And importantly, it happens in that order. So you never take decisions before you know what choices you have. That's a cardinal sin of my colleagues and myself sometimes in Equinor, that we believe we know what the solution is. We take the decision before we have actually reviewed what choices did we have on the table. So very commonly, this is illustrated in this diverging, converging model, so creating choices and making decisions, is illustrated in a process diagram called the double diamond. I added a piece of brackets there saying problematic because it has some issues. But this is again going back into the 80s, 90s. Actually, this was originally developed by the UK government of all things. So the UK government set up a design council and they developed this process diagram of the design thinking process. And yeah, why it's problematic? I mean, it talks about very good things. You should start with discovering the opportunity space, and that's where the diverging part comes in, that you have a problem and then you explore the problem space. What is the holistic situation around the problem? You go into a definition space where you have ways to define what is the problem that you are going to start solving for, and then you go into development mode where you look at all the opportunities to solve the problem, and then you again converge into a delivery where you take the decision that what goes into the shippable product or solution in the end. I think everyone who has been even remotely involved in any kind of product or solution development will say that it never goes this simply, and it never, of course, goes this kind of step by step. And very commonly, and why I added it's a bit problematic, is that in this original form, the double diamond looks very linear. So it's like a step-by-step process, and then you get a perfect result after you do that, and you should spend about as much time on every step. That's also not the case. But what is the case here, and what are good things about this model, is that it highlights a few things. So it highlights that the why, so the discovery and definition, is equally important to the delivery. So why are we doing this? And it also implies, rather than time spent on each phase, it implies that each phase of the process has an equally big impact on the end result. So you can go very wrong in the discovery phase and go all the way into development and delivering something, and you can trace back those poor decisions to the origin. Each of these phases can derail you, each of these phases can make you win. But coming back into this issue of linearity, and it looks very straightforward. So another way, and this might be familiar to some as well, it's very, you can see that we designers are very fond of our process diagrams. The design squiggle is actually a thing, and it just implies that looking at the design process, that's what it looks like from the outside. So we start and we are just rooting up the ground, and we are looking everywhere and really trying to understand. There's a lot of uncertainty, noise, but from that noise starts to emerge patterns, insights that we can narrow down into concept, and then finally the thread kind of calms down into a solution delivery. And that is all good and well if you look at things from a retrospective view, because when you look at things in the future, anything that is linear is actually going to start to look fuzzy the further out you go. And then there we come to the point that a plan will actually never survive contact with reality. So if we think of the design process as something that starts out fuzzy and then narrows down into clarity, and we have a delivery, that's what it looks like in hindsight. And that's what it looks like in the fancy presentation that we do afterwards when we celebrate the win. But with about 20 odd years of selling this way of working in a corporate environment to people who are totally unfamiliar with it and who love plans, by the way, and love projects and love deadlines and budgets that are tied to those plans. Still, while there is strong love for the plan in a corporate environment, there is also the understanding and kind of inconvenient truth that no one wants to talk about, which is on the right. So any plan that draws out a timeline into the future will by default become more fuzzy, more uncertain, unpredictable, because things happen down the line. So in the end, while we are always as designers challenged to be kind of trustworthy and be kind of professional in our way of presenting our work and build the confidence that we can bring in value to the process, what we are actually asked to do is not to show that we will do the thing on the left, because that will imply that we are actually doing the thing on the right. If we say that, yes, we start out by looking a bit disorganized and fussy and still having fun, and it will be great in the end, no one has given me a budget to do anything significant with that explanation yet, because they know that the thing on the right is what actually will happen. So, why the plan is inferior to the process? So let's go back to the double diamond, shall we? I'm not saying, by the way, don't have deadlines. To have deadlines, have budgets, have some sort of measurements on success, but don't tie them into a fixed delivery where the decision is done that by this date, with this money, we will deliver this thing, without thinking about where are we possibly going wrong in that process. So in Equinor, we love our guidelines and documents. We have actually made a guideline for what is a good design process. And this is what we came up with. So we use the double diamond. We use the 4 stages. We use the create choices, make decisions. But we have added a few things, not just to be kind of fancy about it, but to highlight certain things that are missing in the original process diagram. The main thing, iteration. So within these 4 stages, you are continuously iterating. So you iterate from the topic to the problem to developing concepts and so on. And at each stage, we encourage anyone working in this manner to challenge and critically think that are we confident about taking a step forward, or should we maybe take a step back? Because both are equally valid in the process, because each of these stages, each of these phases, discovering, definition, developing and delivering, has an equal impact on the end result. And then to be able to do that, and this is where I kind of encourage my colleagues in Equinor to trust the designers, because the designers have a pretty good grasp about the actual tools to do this. And in each of these phases we have different methods and tools to be able to either create choices for ourselves or make decisions. And that is really where the designer's professionalism comes in, that we match the tools to the process in the context of the development and the context of the team we are working with. So it's not the simplest of processes, but it for me kind of condenses 20 years of experiences of trying to explain to not disbelievers but skeptics why should designers be given a responsibility to run things in their way. Now we of course try to accommodate, but we have certain small criteria that I want to share. So if in Equinor we are around 100 designers working around the company, and we do have certain criteria that we also ask back from our customers. So we have 6 bullet points that I hope are easy for you as well to maybe remember and take into use. So first of all, principle 1, we need to have a focus on the human in the loop. We need to have the collaboration there, so we need the right expertise in the room at the right time. We have very specialized solutions in our environment. That's probably true for everyone. And if we don't get access to the right people with the right knowledge, we are on thin ice. It needs to be iterative. So even though we in Equinor, we love our projects, we love our project budgets, fixed deliveries and so on, we ask for iteration within that, following the process that I just showed. But the iteration is not random. So the iteration happens within the sequence of the process diagram. So we don't jump randomly from discovery to definition and then to delivery. We go in them in the right order, always basing it on real evidence. So if we don't have access to actually go out and see ourselves, we look for the nearest person who has seen things happen and try to get as close to the events as possible. And then, of course, that helps us get the holistic picture of things. So is the application we are designing now used indoor in the office or out at sea on a ship? That has a big difference in how we design things, but can be easily overlooked if you only look at the project plan, where things are always very simple. So what is this doing for us? It is helping us mitigate certain challenges, and I hope that some of these challenges can resonate with many of you here in the audience as well, because in Equinor and in other companies I worked in the professional space, I am very far removed from the customer, which is the end user. But then I also have to consider that who is actually my customer. So my customer is very often a decision maker who will never use the product I am designing. The decision maker has certain expectations on the value. They want their team to perform the tasks 20% faster or have 100% less frequent injuries or whatnot. So with whatever we develop will create a chain reaction of expectations down the line, but there is also then the expectation of that value being realized, and we can't, as solution developers, realize that unless we get access down the line to the people actually doing the job. So we can't trust and we can't rely purely on the word of the decision maker. We need to get access to also the people who either make or break the value creation that the decision maker wants. And the only way to do that really is through gaining insight into their situation and creating solutions that help improve their lives. Very often that means that we are not only concerned with technology, because if we put in a new fancy technology into an old work process, we will lose a lot of the benefits. We are constantly challenging, focusing on plans and projects because they give us a blind spot for the life cycle needs. We forget that there is something that happens after we ship. And maybe a curious one that has kind of come up here lately when I've been observing how our designers work with our stakeholders. And that is that there are two languages being spoken in development. So the decision makers who always sit somewhere around the company, they very much talk about the outcomes, as I mentioned. They want things to go faster, more efficient, less errors, whatnot. And then the people who create the technologies to be able to do that very often talk about the features and the technology and the tech stack and the architecture. And those are two languages that sometimes don't match. So our designers very much find themselves in the kind of role of an interpreter between two very different language families even. And one very efficient and effective way of bridging the gap between languages, between people who talk in outcomes and people who talk in technical features, is then the design methodology. So to wrap it up, I don't really care if we talk about design thinking. I think design thinking is relevant, if you want to call it that. But as I said, I don't really care about the thinking, I care about the doing. Design as such is solving problems, it's creating value, and we just need to collaborate with the people who can then realize the value out of it. But we can't do that just by thinking about it, we actively need to do it. And that is where the design process comes in. So even if we are given a project and a project plan, we can apply that process I showed, iteration, evidence-based, continuous learning, where we incrementally improve towards a better result than what we thought we had in the first place. So that's what I want to leave you with. Plans fail, but the process can save the plan. Design thinking, if you want to call it that, is still relevant, but it's not necessarily a dogmatic thing that you have to stand in a room and put yellow sticky notes on the wall to be able to do it. So thank you. With that, I think we have maybe some time if anyone has any takeaways or questions before we give the floor to the next speaker. No? I said I have no idea what this clock is doing, so I don't know how much time we have.
So, if you want to grab the mic, yeah. If you have a question, yeah.
Go ahead. How do you combine design thinking and solution architecture and technical architecture?
Excellent question. By collaborating. So I'm very closely collaborating, even though we are not officially aligned in the structure of the company, with our enterprise architecture team. And our head of enterprise architecture has once told me that he believes that architects and designers kind of were separated at birth and they are just using different tools to achieve similar things. So whether it's a business architect or solution architect or enterprise architect or technical architect, they are talking about the same things with maybe different set of words and a different set of methodology than the designers they are counterparted with. So very closely related. and best used in collaboration. I haven't, to be honest, yet met anyone who would kind of be a Renaissance person to bridge that gap and do both seats perfectly. But I have seen very good working pairs. So I can just give a very quick example about using both fields to save a lot of money by killing stupid ideas early. And that is that when we are frequently asked about, hey, we need a dashboard to show a lot of data because data is the new oil, then we draw a dashboard with our design tools, or even with pen and paper sometimes, with the values that the people asking want. And then we sit down with the architect and start mapping out, do we even have that data? Do we even have the sensor to get that data? And then we can go back to the person asking and saying that, yes, you can get your dashboard, but first we need to put the sensor there, and then we need to do the data transfer, and then we need to do algorithm to normalize the data, and it's going to cost you 20 million. Are you still interested in the data? And that usually kills the conversation right there.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I can just talk.
Good. All good.
Just be loud.
Yeah, how do you measure the value and outcome of these
Yeah.
enterprise tools? Because like in a commercial setting,
Yeah.
you usually measure by
Yeah.
monthly active users,
Yeah.
whatever.
So that's a challenge for us because that's very fragmented, and there are very different opinions on that. So one suite of applications or tools in our enterprise setting could be measured on one thing and then another on a totally different one. So for example, very common ones are efficiency or less errors. And they are kind of quantifiable because we know when the process is happening and when the process fails. That being said, because that's so fragmented, and in a large company of Equinor you have huge long value chains where you have different technologies interacting. So if you look only at one piece of the process and you optimize that one and it suddenly starts going 20% faster, there's no guarantee that the process after it has capacity to take 20% more of the stuff that's coming out at the end. So that's where, again, architecture and design are in critical roles to understand the big picture and the life cycles and the holistic picture before we commit to, yes, 20% increase in efficiency is really good, let's do it.
Any other questions? No?
No?
I actually
Excellent.
have a question,
Yep.
if I can. Well, I have two questions, but I'll start with one of them. So, in the process of design thinking and everything, usually I find in larger companies, the people who should be testing or the main stakeholders are so busy with their other work.
Yeah.
Like, how do you identify the ones that will actually test this and say this is
That's
good?
a relevant topic, definitely. And apart from being busy, one very common experience is that they are afraid. They believe that they are being audited, that we are actually coming there to see if they are doing it correctly, when we are actually going there to see that is our technology performing as it's intended. So there are many layers of trust you need to build. There's no one simple way of doing it except building trust, and that is a very different process for every individual. But once you gain that trust and once you get the end users and the stakeholders to see that you are their ally, you can actually change their workday for the better, they will not stop giving you input. So I've had many experiences where I have been given half an hour because that person is very busy. And then after half an hour, I'm like, hey, you said you are very busy. Should we wrap up? No, I still want to show you this. And then we go on for 2 hours more. So, yeah.
And the second question, it kind of is answered by the same thing as you just said, but when it comes to the implementation stage and the after actually getting the users to use the tools, I find it super difficult because you design this thing, but then people actually need to use it, How?
Yeah, that's and especially now with. By the way, I didn't mention AI yet, haven't I? but with AI, that has become a new thing because, as has been discussed on this stage a lot, AI has some issues, and we are, of course, heavily pushing out tools with AI. And that discussion about what role should design play, and it comes back to the life cycle. So in not only designing the solution, but also designing the onboarding.
Yeah.
And are there things that we can use design-wise in the interfaces, whether they are digital or physical or interhuman, to create friction where we need to create friction, i.e. make people think when they need to think, and then smoothen it out when they can just go on autopilot. So kind of building in the learning process into the product development is kind of the holy grail there and the next level, and that's also a challenge too, because technology is chugging on and new things coming in that the things that worked 6 months ago might not work anymore tomorrow. But still it comes down to basic human instincts of taking the shortcuts, I believe. So if we keep that in mind and try to mitigate the bad things that can happen and elevate the good things that can happen, then yeah.
Perfect. Any other questions? No?
No?
All right. Thank
Excellent.
you so much.
Thank you.